Think Tech Hawaii. Welcome to come to Asian Review again, once a month show. This is Johnson Choi, President of Hong Kong China Hawaii Chamber of Commerce. And today's topic is China-Japan debate about historical memory. Today's guest is Professor Henningsen with the College of Social Science, Department of Political Science of University of Hawaii. Professor Henningsen was born in 1938 Germany. He grew up in a post-war country. He moved to the United States in 1969 and became a fellow of the Stanford Hoover Institute. In 1970, he came to University of Hawaii and has been with the University of Hawaii since then. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you.
Okay. We have a discussion before we came up to the show, and we have a wide topic we can talk about. And one of the things we try to compare is the post-war Germany and Japan, how the two nations look at the historic World War II and how they came to terms. And one of the things we talk about is the Japanese political class leadership is unwilling to come in terms with the World War II history. Maybe you can share with us some of your thoughts.
Well, in a way, you could say for the first 20 years, there was not much difference between Germany and Japan. Both countries were in denial. But West Germany, I mean, Germany was a divided country, and West Germany was forced by the Americans to enter into some kind of conciliatory negotiations with Israel and the Jewish World Congress. And that was in the early 50s. But the trial in Nuremberg and the trial in Tokyo, which was considered to be victor's justice, these negotiations between West Germany and Israel and the Jewish World Congress did not have really a major impact on the way Germans in general would think about the crimes that were committed in Eastern Europe, in Russia, and especially in the death camps. That began slowly, you could say, in the 60s. That's when you have this division between Germany and Japan. From the 60s on, Germany was opening up, to a critical debate. The student movement in Germany helped. And then you have, the refugee from Nazi Germany, Willy Brandt, becoming chancellor in 1969. And, he, having, left Germany when he was young in 1933, he had a tremendous impact on the young in Germany, and he then had this great moment in Warsaw in December 1970, exactly. This is a very iconic picture, and he described later on what happened. He was standing there having laid a wreath on the monument for the destruction of the Jewish ghetto by the German military in 1943, and he didn't know what to do. He was standing there, and suddenly, he fell on his knees. It was not planned. And you had, the world press standing around there and taking this picture. And this picture became front page news. I remember I was then in December 1970 at the beach in Waikiki, and, the newspaper boys coming selling this picture. And there it was, Willy Brandt on the front page. And that has become now a picture that you have on books. This is, so to speak, the moment that other countries should enter into apologizing, for or recognizing at least the crimes they have committed. I mean, you have South Korean organizations that use this picture as an ad in American newspapers, front a whole page having this picture of Willy Brandt, asking the Japanese political class, when are you going to do the same? Well, and for some strange reason, the Japanese refuse.
I guess in some contract that the news media also sometimes play up to this.
Right, the Yasukuni, here's Abe going to the Yasukuni shrine, and where you have all the fallen soldiers of Japan since the Meiji period until the end of 45. And you have also, since I think 77 or 78, the 7 people that were sentenced to death and hanged, they're commemorated as well. And Hirohito, the emperor, under which this terror took place, stopped going there. Whereas Yasukuni whereas Abe and some other prime ministers of Japan continued to go there. I mean, Abe actually went in, when he was prime minister before 2007, I think, he went to India in order, no, it was not 2007, it was a little bit later, but he went to India in order to thank the son of the only judge who did not join the consensus about, the people who were on trial there. He refused to...
The Tokyo trial.
The Tokyo trial.
Right.
He refused in 48, to support that. And so he went and thanked the son for having, he thanked the son for what his father had done. And the son said, well, you can, in situations like that, you do not have only, there's not only one side.
I see.
And that is certainly an argument that you never will hear in Germany. There is only one side when it comes to the crimes of Nazi Germany in World War II. So there is no discussion about that.
Let's go back to the Japan and the German, how they deal with the Second World War issue. We were also discussing about, actually, China was one of the key allies of the United States.
Right.
But seems like after the Second World War, China has not been given either the credit or been mentioned in most of the communique in the modern American history.
Yes.
Is there any reason why?
No, it's, well, look, it's a very interesting question because people sometimes say it may have had to do with the Cold War. But the Cold War, took place in Europe as well as in Asia. So the United States wanted to have Germany and Japan as allies, but they pushed the Germans to start this reconciliation, this process of recognizing publicly the crimes that they had committed. But they didn't do that with the Japanese. And I think that is one of the major reasons why, the Japanese got away with not doing anything, because Douglas MacArthur, who was the commanding general, he thought he needed the Japanese emperor in order to sustain discipline and order in Japan. And he didn't want him to be charged with anything, even though you could say he had been in charge of everything. So the Showa emperor, who came to power in 1926 and died in 1989, was never on the firing line. He was never confronted with it. And I think imagine one of the Nazi leaders, would have become president of West Germany, what that would have done, to this processing of memory in Germany. Here you have the emperor who was presiding over imperial Japanese conquests in Asia, and he stays in power until he dies a natural death in 1989. So that, I think, was a very, very major difference between Germany and Japan. And in a way, you could blame the Americans, for not having pushed the Japanese. Now, on the other hand, you have also, the strange thing that the Chinese, for example, did not push either, you know, the Japanese after 1972, you know, when they established relations. Why they didn't do that is not completely clear, but the Japanese always say, look, we did a lot of economic support of China. And in a way, they thought this is it. You know, now the Germans have done that also, on top of you know, recognizing the.
But sometimes when I look at Japan and Germany after World War II, I mean, I'm talking about Germany reconstruction after World War II and Japan reconstruction compared to China. Of course, China went through the Cultural Revolution and a whole bunch of stuff.
Right.
And I guess based on some conversation, historic footage from Deng Xiaoping, at that time, China didn't want to raise the issue.
Right.
Because, like you mentioned, that China may not want to show that the weaker side of China at that point, and maybe have no or little bargaining power. So I guess what they try to do is to push some of those disputes to the later generation. Hopefully with the wisdom of the two countries, we could settle it somehow.
No, that's true. Yeah. I mean, it will be interesting to see once the archives are opened, whether there were discussions between Mao and Zhou Enlai and others about this issue at that time, you know, in the 70s. Whether Mao simply said in a very grandiose way, oh, forget it, you know, this is something we should not consider as a major issue, you know, because after all, you have to remember, he had also to answer to the tensions between the Communist Party and the Kuomintang. And Nanjing, you know, was in December of 1937 was abandoned by the Kuomintang. Chiang Kai-shek moved, you know, the capital to inner China, and so the slaughter that happened and this orgy of violence that took place in Nanjing, you know, the 300,000 that were killed and the 60,000 that were raped, you know, that is simply.
Okay, maybe when we come back in about a minute, we can talk a little bit about the, you know, the Nanjing massacre. I mean, there was the dispute on numbers, whether it's 300,000 or 200,000, 100,000, whatever the number it may be. And maybe we can also talk about a little bit about what we call the comfort woman, and some people call it actually sex slave, which have some argument on that topic. Okay, we'll be back in a few minutes. Asia in Review.
Hello, I'm Patrick Bratton. Please join me every Thursday at 1 o'clock for Global Connections, where I talk to a variety of guests and range through many issues from contemporary, international, political events, things talking about national security, all sorts of international issues, and also more local issues, history, and so on. I look forward to having you join me and talking with some of my guests. Thank you.
Aloha, my name is John Waihe'e, and I used to be a part of all the things that you might be angry at. I served in government here and may have made decisions that affects you. So I want to invite you in. I want to invite you in to Talk Story with me and some very special guests every other Monday here at Talk Story with John Waihe'e. Come on in, join us, express your opinion, learn more about your state, and then do something about it. Aloha.
Thinking Hawaii Asian Review. This is Johnson Choi, the host, and our guest today is Professor Henningsen. When we, before we went to the break, we were talking about that dispute in numbers about how many people got killed, what China called a Nanjing massacre, and also the comfort woman issue. We share some talk about the numbers and where the number came from. Maybe you can.
Well, I was, you know, surprised when I went to the Nanjing Memorial in April of 2012. You have the number 300,000 put on the outside wall of the memorial. The memorial is a very, very powerful building, and the director with whom I talked then, he said, you know, it was modeled after the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. They went there and looked at the structure, and it's really one of the most extraordinary historical museums today. the Nanjing Memorial. So I asked him about the number, and I said, look, you have a lot of Japanese who question this number. Some even say, there may have been killed 20,000 or 30,000. And he said, yeah, I know that, but this number is based on the estimates that were introduced in the Tokyo trial. So we are not making that up. This is not Chinese fantasy, as the Japanese sometimes say. These are numbers that are based on the estimates that were introduced at the Tokyo trial. And it's the same, with the women that were raped there, 60,000. And you have to remember, this orgy of violence begins before the 13th of December when they land in Hangzhou, and they move up there, and also coming in from Shanghai, too. And when you read the reports of Japanese veterans, there's a book by Honda who has collected that all. I mean, it's absolutely amazing, the violence that was perpetrated. And for me, as a German, when I went the first time to the memorial, what really struck me was this unbelievable racist attitude of the Japanese toward the Chinese. It was like, the Germans moving into Poland and Russia, the same kind of language. These were inferior people, the Chinese, and you could do with them whatever you wanted to do. That's how the Germans thought about the Slavs, and certainly about the Jews of Eastern Europe, that they rounded up to be killed. So in that sense, for me, it was a revelation, going to Nanjing, and also the museum close to the Marco Polo Bridge, where some of these events are described not in the graphic way that you have in Nanjing, but you have, newsreel material. And then you have this issue with the comfort women. I think it's absolutely demeaning, and you could say it should be beyond the dignity of Japanese officials to refuse to recognize that these military bordellos existed, and that they, forced women to, become military slaves, sex slaves. They still deny that, Abe especially. Now Abe, is the grandson of
General?
No, he is the grandson of a guy who was arrested as a war criminal. He was placed in prison, but he was never charged and sentenced. But he was he wrote a biography, an autobiography, and he was an administrator in Manchuria, in the 30s. And when you read, that biography is absolutely stunning. The disrespect that he shows toward Chinese women and how he used them. In a way you could almost think that Abe's grandfather invented the whole sex slave system that you have then being practiced in the military.
Maybe that's how the attitude of Abe. I don't know.
Well, Abe is he is a nationalist, and he's very, he's a guy who wants to, he feels that Japan loses something if it recognizes this record. I think it would win.
Actually, it's very interesting because I spent more than 43 years in Hawaii, and for the last 10 years, I spent a lot of time actually in San Francisco. And actually, San Francisco passed the law to enact a comfort woman memorial in San Francisco. And then, but even though that is passed, you can see the kind of negative publicity and also the kind of political and money pouring in from Tokyo. Right. And they're targeting every councilman. In San Francisco, they call them supervisors. Okay.
Yep. Right.
And you have people actually go out in public seminar testifying that all those the South Korea or the Chinese call them a sex slave, they are actually paid prostitute. I mean, it's really blown your mind.
No, it's. But look, I mentioned that to you before, in April of last year, when Abe was visiting Washington, American Japanologists wrote up a letter of protest in support of critical historians in Japan. And this letter was signed by 175 people, and they asked me, because I'd written about German and Japanese war records, or the memory, to sign also. And since that was published, this letter, everyone on that list, by now there are 440 on that list, everyone on that list receives regularly letters, critical letters from Japan. And they, bombard us with books, that deny, the comfort women, and they go so far, to say, well, this war was not really a war of aggression. This was a war against Western colonialism and imperial. Now, when you tell Chinese that, they laugh. But I do not understand how a political class like the Japanese gets away with this really very, very cockamamie understanding of their own history.
We were talking about Iris Chan, who wrote the book The Rape of Nanjing.
Right.
And I met her, with the honor to meet her a couple of times. I still remember. You also talk about in the 90s when she came to Hawaii to talk about the Rape of Nanjing, the book.
Right.
Not only through you, but through other sources. She actually requests armed police and even FBI to protect her. The reason is because it's a taboo subject in Hawaii because of the huge Japanese population.
Well, no, you see, I was one of the organizers. The other was Vintek Lam. He is a businessman here in Chinatown and a poet. And the two of us organized this event. And Iris Cheng said, I will not speak if you cannot provide police protection. And I said, why? Because I have received death threats in San Francisco. And I, for that reason, have to get the guarantee from you that I will be protected. And so they were, in the ballroom at the campus center, there were 1,000 people, and there were 2 policemen flanking her. But it was a mixed audience, and I would say maybe 50% were Chinese, 30 or so % were Japanese, local Japanese, and then you had other people being. So it was a very, very ethnically mixed audience, and there was nothing. There was no violence, nothing, no protests. So I do not think that there was any Japanese resentment. They actually said, it was wonderful that the 2 of you had brought her to Hawaii. Now, she wanted to come to Hawaii also because there were 2 of my colleagues that she had quoted in her book, Rudy Rommel and Fred Rix. And Fred Rix was born in Nanjing, and his father was a missionary there, and he had contributed or been part of that international group that protected Chinese in Nanjing, which was run by a German, the manager of Siemens, Rabe. And when you go, to Nanjing today, there is the house in which Rabe lived is a museum.
I see.
And the ground floor is full of pictures of Iris Cheng. So you have there the Rabe Memorial in Nanjing, because Iris Cheng got a lot of the information about what happened in 1937 through the journals of Rabe, which were not published before. So she was instrumental for these journals to become published. Also, she went to Germany and interviewed the children. So it's and there are 2 movies, a Chinese and an American, a German movie on Rabe and Nanjing.
Okay, we are heading towards the close the program. Maybe in the next 2-3 minutes, you look at, I know Asia is a big place. How do you see in the next maybe 5-10 years how the Japanese, Chinese, and South Korean relationship might be heading?
Well, you see, I think the question is primarily a question for the Japanese.
So they have to take the
Yes, they have to take the
initiative.
initiative.
Yeah.
Now, what will happen in China, I don't know, because in China you have all kinds of historical denials as well. You mentioned the Cultural Revolution. You can use the Great Leap Forward, and you have lots of books being published of all of that. Tiananmen Square also. So I think in the next 10, 15 years, all of these historical records will become more discussed. And I am optimistic, that the Abe denial generation will not only die, but I mean, what will emerge then, will be critical voices in Japan. They are in Korea, certainly, but I think the three countries that you mentioned, China, Japan, and Korea, will not go to war. But if I'm allowed to say one thing, I find Japan more problematic than China when it comes to that. I always find it more provocative.
In fact, in September, I have a guest, also professor from Center for Chinese Study, who going to talk about the East China Sea and the South China Sea issue. And I guess that right now is a very interesting,
It is.
and
It
especially like East China Sea, when China Navy ship and Russian Navy ship start sailing very close to the Diaoyu Island.
But next week they are all here together in Hawaii,
Right.
in the maneuver.
Okay.
I mean, you have, I don't know, 29 countries being here.
Yes.
Very Japanese and German ships are also here.
Well, it's good to good to be getting together in more friendly
Right.
terms than
That's
facing
right.
each other
Yes.
off,
Yes.
on
No, it's
open
true.
oceans. I
Yes.
guess we are towards the end of the program. Thank you for coming, and I understand that you'll be going to Germany and Poland and other places.
And Ukraine, yes.
And then I hope I can invite you back for the next show.
That will be delightful.
And maybe
yes.
another topic.
Yes.
Okay. So,
Thank you
Professor?
very much. Thank you very much.
thank you for coming. Goodbye. See you in about 4 weeks. See you in July.